Thank you, Carlos. Thank you to all our friends um, of Daphne 2020. Today we have a special day. This is the second day of the film festival. The first day has been extremely successful, and I'm pretty sure that the second day is going to be the same. But let me now to introduce the president of City College of New York, Dr. Vince Boudreau, and also Professor Danielle Zach, who is a professor at the City College of New York. Dr. Boudreau and Dr. Danielle Zach are going to have a conversation about the documental on Benjamin Ferencz, a former prosecutor at the Nuremberg war crime trials and advocated for human rights and the rule of law. And he is the recipient of the City College President Medal from his alma mater. Thank you very much. And here is Dr. Boudreau and Dr. Zach.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I'm really excited that we get a chance to see this film. And making it was a real highlight of my year, but also kind of unpacking the Ben Ferencz's truly complex thinking about human rights was really just a joy. I'm glad that people are going to get a chance to see the film.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here and to have this conversation with you, Dr. Boudreau. I very much enjoyed the film and watching you speak with this remarkable man who's transformed international criminal law. I thought maybe we'd start off by thinking about, how did you find out that Mr. Ferencz was actually a City College alumnus?
One morning, I got about 30 emails from City College alumni. There's a Netflix film, Prosecuting Evil, that features him. And in it, he talks about being a City College graduate. And so, in fact, one of the challenges that we had was, that film is about a 1-hour documentary. Again, truly extraordinary film. But how were we going to steer his conversation away from the stories he told and the history he related in that film? Yeah.
And I see in the film you're moved to tears at the profound work that he's done, at the tremendous accomplishments and commitment to making the world a better place. Can you say what left the deepest impression about your interview with him?
Well, first of all, as you know, I always have a teardrop ready to fall. So it wasn't it's not a rare circumstance that something moves me to tears. But so there are a couple of things, and the first is he's had an extraordinary life, and he himself several times during our conversation was, in recounting things that happened in the 1940s, himself moved to tears. I mean, in particular, he was talking about one man, the man that really got him started thinking about this work, and he was in the camps, and his job was to record the names of every German soldier, officer, official that came into the camps. And what happened then is when the book was filled, they were supposed to throw it out. And he decided to keep it. He decided to keep it and hide it, knowing full well that if it had been discovered, he probably would have been put to death. But he felt so moved to preserve the record in the hope that someday there would be justice. And, Ben talks about this person and just, it wells up inside him. On the one hand, the force of the injustice, and on the other hand, the courage of the man who made this stand. So that was part of it. But the other kind of extraordinary thing, we arrived at his house, and he and his wife had been together for 80 years. And outside, their names are posted outside the door, and there was a black slash through her name. And she had died 2 days before we did the interview. Never did he say that he had lost his life partner of 80 years. And he just felt so strongly about the importance of taking every opportunity to move forward the conversation about human rights and international law. And then at the end of it all, to have the opportunity to recognize him as someone that came from our institution. You know, as you know, I'm deeply committed to the idea that City College is an extraordinary place. And here I was with this extraordinary man, able to really give him the highest honor that a City College president can give. And it just felt like a moment in my life that would never come again and that I would never forget. And it was just deeply moving.
Yeah, he's just such a remarkable human being. His own bravery and, you know, having to enter camps and process this evidence is alone a brave act. His humility is also quite remarkable, and of course his commitment.
Yeah,
and it was just a really wonderful conversation.
Yeah, humble, but not inspired by the work too. You know, he says in the film that on the Jeep that he would travel to the camps, he had this sign, immer allein in German, always alone. And he'd say, you know, he would go into the camps and he'd say, everybody get out of my way. I'm gonna, you know, he said very often I would go in the front door of the camps and the German soldiers were running out the back. So humble, but also emboldened by the work that he was doing and not shy to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is a young Ben Ferencz coming to City College in the 1930s similar to some of the students that we have at City in 2020? What are some of the challenges they face and vulnerabilities that they have in common?
Oh, you know this. The thing that we say to our alumni of all generations, and you know, Ben graduated in the early 1940s, is that they're the same people. You know, they come from different parts of the world. They have different specific milieu that they come out of, but they are, every last one of them are smarter than they know, confused by, you know, what this institution is that they're entering. And whether they know it or not, they're at a moment when their success at City College is going to determine whether they equip themselves to make a difference in the world or they become a member of the working class. You know, so Ben said, I didn't know what college was. He didn't say, I didn't know how to apply to college or I didn't know if I could afford college. He said, I didn't know what this institution was. He didn't speak English very well. Nobody in his family even thought about high school, let alone college. And so he comes to the institution because people say, you should do the next thing, you should do the next thing. And so he always just did. Even Harvard Law was kind of, so he graduates from City College. Now what are you going to do? Well, there's this other place called Harvard. Let me go be a lawyer. That seems like a good thing to do. We have the same thing today. You know, we have students that fill our classrooms and fill our hallways who are the first in their families to go to college, believe that probably somebody made a mistake when they let them in, don't know how to navigate the institution, and are absolutely at a point in their lives where if they're successful in studying in this place, they will change their entire life and they will change the whole history of their families. And that's something that has been a consistent mission and theme of who we educate and how we educate at CCNY.
Yeah. I also think about, you know, the 1930s, the discrimination against Jewish immigrants, and just the resilience to keep pushing forward against all odds, against poverty. He talks about growing up in Hell's Kitchen. This even, you know, how this very, you know, his own living situation and extreme insecurity is also what pushes him into college to pursue criminal justice. And of course, his initial vision is local.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's just a lot of parallels I see also with our students, again, in terms of, you know, challenging circumstances and really astonishing resilience.
But he also enters a place. So yes, there's deep discrimination against Jewish people, But he enters a place in CCNY where it's 95% Jewish. So on that campus, news of what was happening in Europe, what was happening in the camps, hits them at a visceral level. And so, and you find that again through the ages, where whatever the next society is going to be, we're constituting it on the campus of CCNY. So struggles, yes, but then you come onto the campus with people who are largely facing the same struggles, and I think generation after generation, our students have drawn strength from the community and the society they constitute on our campus.
Can you perhaps, again, Ben's initial, vision was to make a contribution to his local community. Can you talk about how City College actually works to not just uplift individuals, but entire communities?
This is a really interesting, it's an interesting moment for that conversation, right? I think we do it in two ways. Probably more than two, but I'll talk about two. The first is your strike at graduation, that our students don't graduate as individuals going in the world. They graduate as a social phenomenon. These 3,000 brand new college graduates, virtually, I won't say virtually all of them, but a huge proportion of whom are in the act of inscribing in their family history the promise of social mobility, right? And so I'm struck every year at graduation where you see these waves and waves of students, and then in back of them, families and relatives who are there, and you can tell many of them are not comfortable on a college campus. They're there because their kids are graduating, but this is very much the next generation treading ground that was not comfortable to the older generations. That's the first thing. But I've always thought that as an institution, as a public institution, we have a public mission, and so we are now surrounded by a society that is reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic, that is reeling from the inescapable realization that the whole legal, procedural, policy infrastructure for racial justice in our society that was established in the 60s and the 70s got us about 50% of the way there. And what we have done, what a neoliberal society allows people with power to do, is to take those rules that are supposed to be build the right rules and you will build a just society, whatever the outcome, right? That's the liberal promise. And we know that that's not how it works, right? People are able, in the way they apply the rules, in the way that they figure out how to make people unequal before the law, even though the law says that you are equal before the law. And then you get these tremendously unjust outcomes, disparities in educational outcomes, in health, in income, in how people are treated by our criminal justice system. And so, we have a strong and growing partnership with the Harlem Chamber of Commerce and a whole group of social agencies, where we are taking efforts on campus that are only a few years old. The Campus Engagement Network, which is explicitly designed to help and support faculty in how they teach and write and the projects they undertake to get out into the world and direct our students towards areas of social change that need their attention. We have an architecture school that is right now in the process of working with actors in Harlem to identify and try to make safer spaces, particularly spaces for community organizations. We have an engineering school, and we've just brought in a new interim dean of the School of Engineering who said we should be the School of Engineering for the city of New York. That meaning that whatever the city needs from us out there, we should be preparing that workforce in here. So I think, what we are working towards, and we have to keep working towards it, is an idea that, yes, we teach and we prepare generations of students in the way I described earlier, but we also have caches of expertise in our medical school and our education school that need explicitly to be turned outward. And we need, as an institution, every day to say, what's the biggest challenge of our day? And right now, it's yes, it's COVID-19, but it's all of the injustices and inequities that COVID-19 has revealed in the unequal impression it's made on our society.
Yeah, there's actually a question in the chat I see here about CCNY's commitment on human rights matters, in a context of this powerful grassroots movement that we've seen in all 50 US states and actually has moved, on globally. Appearing in European capitals, African countries, in the Pacific, in the Middle East. What is CCNY, or how is CCNY engaged on this in this movement, in the Black Lives Matter movement?
In the Black Lives Matter, well, a couple of things. I think, I, Dean Mercado, and several other people began this effort at a sustained human rights conversation. There's now a minor in human rights. So we are explicitly training young men and women to get out and make their mark in the work of human rights. Like most college presidents, I issued a statement following the George Floyd murder and committed the college to doing two things. First of all, asking faculty members as they taught and thinking about the way that racial injustice operates today. It's not about a new Voting Rights Act. It's about understanding and analyzing the pathways to inequality. Understanding, and sometimes the statistically hidden truth about unequal health outcomes or education outcomes or any of these others. So how are we equipping our students with the skills to get into the meat of the problem? And are we teaching them to write? Are we teaching them to do statistical analysis? In our education school, are we challenging some of the tropes of education that leave so many young people behind? And then I think finally, we are a nation leader in the top 2 or 3 institutions nationwide in promoting social mobility among our students. But I think what that also means is that department by department, faculty member by faculty member, in what we teach and what we do research on, what we publish and what we speak, we need to think about what the contribution of our specific expertise is to identifying and eradicating the barriers to social mobility. Because in this day and age, racism is, it's no longer about the kind of Jim Crow laws that juridically separated, white people and people of color. It's about, do you have, what are the economic obstacles to asserting your will? What are the obstacles to power, to getting elected power, to having your voice heard? And I think what that means is, across the full range of the disciplines that we teach, we should be thinking about, in a very, very public way, what our contribution is to the eradication of the obstacles to social mobility, and how that then translates into a more just society.
Yeah, I think, Ben Ferencz, at the end of your conversation, to bring this back to your interview, had essentially passed the torch on to you and the present generation. And I think this certainly, the efforts of your administration to incorporate human rights into the programming at the college, as well as your, the focus on, City College as an engine of social mobility, would certainly advance and kind of, give honor to his legacy. I have a question in the chat that is about Ferencz's role. I think maybe this comes out at the end of your conversation with him, because one of his final contributions is actually to advocate for the creation of the International Criminal Court, which is a novel institution. This is the first standing international criminal court to try individuals for mass atrocity crimes like the ones that he tried in Nuremberg for genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, war crimes. And so did he talk much about his role or his efforts to advocate for the creation of the ICC with you?
He talked about it a little bit. That was a point where he was, at that point he was being joined by many, many other people. And so it was really a movement that was gathering strength. He talked a lot more about the origins of the idea of an international legal structure. I think one of the things he says in the film is that he was asked to give the closing argument in the first case tried before the International Criminal Court. But the really extraordinary thing was, so he goes into the Nuremberg trials at a time, and we're guilty of this approach today in the American criminal justice system. We want to punish an individual, right? We want somebody. You get something as big and complex as the economic crisis of the mortgage-backed security frauds of 2008, and all we want as a society is like for some banker to be dragged in front of the camera so we can say that guy's guilty, and then we move on, and we don't really. It's harder to get your head around structures and processes and systems. So he goes into Nuremberg. He is an assistant in the first round of trials where 21 people are convicted. And then the Americans are getting ready to pack up and go home. And he first says, there's an apparatus here. There are soldiers and engineers and bureaucrats that must be held personally to account. But then he starts, as he starts preparing his case and he starts making his argument, he realizes that retribution is the smallest thing, or the punishment of an individual for an individual's transgressions is the least ambitious thing that he wants to get out of this. He wants to get out of this a system of law that will prevent and punish and establish for anyone contemplating a violation of human rights or crimes against humanity, there is a system of law that will rise against you. And so he starts thinking about this in the 1940s and 1950s. And so there's a straight line between, this one person who's thinking systemically while everybody else is thinking about punishing the villains, the individual villains. And he just traces that through his entire life's work. And so, many, many times he will say a system of laws, make law, not war, and it comes from his early realizations as he was involved in his stage of those Nuremberg trials.
Yeah. At 27, I think he had never been in a courtroom. Is that what he had mentioned in the film? Did he talk about his feelings about entering that space? And
it's funny, right? Because you see he's and in the Netflix film, he talks a little bit more about this. He's diminutive, right? He was turned down by every branch of the military because he was too small. When he's at the podium in Nuremberg, he's standing on law books, so he reaches the podium, and he reaches the podium like about here, and so he's got a real sense on the one hand of that. I didn't know anything. It's my first trial. There's no really established body of human rights or law. He had a professor in Harvard that got him thinking about this stuff, but he's developing this as he goes along. And so he has this sense of himself as like this little scrappy guy, but then, at every turn, he is so motivated. He's so committed that, he yells at his commanding officer when he's told to go home. His commanding officer says, he enters the courtroom because he says, you can't let these people go. You can't do it. And I think as a way of brushing him off, the guy says to him, well, in addition to your other duties, can you run these trials? And he says, yes, I can. Probably no idea how he was going to do it. But he just couldn't turn away from what he felt he was called upon to do.
Yeah. And it's seems like it also was not just in his public life, right, in his work, but also in his private life. He took making a contribution to the world very seriously for his children as well.
Oh, he never stopped. When we were there, after we shot the film, he wanted to, he brought us into his back study, and he's got, just, more emails than I get, and he's answering all of them, and he's publishing things, and he's got, cards that say "Law, Not War," and it's, and then we went through family photos, some of which show up in the film, and you see as he's putting these photos out, on the one hand, it's him against the tapestry of history. Here he is in Washington, here he is in Nuremberg, here he is. One case that he's very, very proud of was a case where he was able to get the German government to pay, really substantial money in reparations to Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. And in every picture, it's history, Ben Ferencz, and his family. So he's bringing, he's bringing his wife, who he married when they were very, very young, and she's going through the world, and his kids who were with us on that day, same thing. And you get the sense that he just never stopped teaching, and he never stopped talking about these things that it so impassioned him.
Yeah. Did anything else happen off camera that you'd like to share with us?
Well, he's very strong. He he was telling me, after the Netflix thing comes out, all of a sudden he has a new level of celebrity. So he's being asked to go every place. And we had asked him actually to come to New York to receive the medal at a dinner. And he says, I can't do it. I was in, and I'll get the cities wrong, but it was something like I had to go to Chicago, and then the next day I flew to California, and then I flew to Philadelphia, and then I flew to Houston, and then I was back to California, and I was on another plane, and all of a sudden my chest hurt, and I woke up, and I was in a hospital, and there was a crucifix over me, and I didn't know where I was, and he had a heart attack. So he tells me this, and then he says, feel my muscle. So he's at this moment, mind you, a few months away from turning 100. All right, he's now 100 years old, and he goes, the doctors now tell me I can't do my exercises, so I only do 75 push-ups a day, but I used to do 100. By the way, last time I talked to him, which was a couple weeks ago, he's now back to doing his age +1. So now he's doing 101 push-ups a day. Very proud of his strength and perseverance, and you get that in how he talked about why he had to pursue this struggle. You get that in he's a many times decorated war hero for his battlefield exploits. And this from a guy that was rejected by every service branch, and you get the sense that he figured out a way to trick them into accepting him into the military, and then this tremendous physical strength that he has as a 100-year-old man, and again, against the backdrop of him losing his life partner, 80 years, he said, and never a fight. A few days before we went and met him. I mean, just really a stunningly remarkable person.
I want to welcome viewers to place some comments or questions in the chat. We'd be happy to engage those questions too. I also, just following up on what you just said, I'm thinking about his sense of humor. Right? Here's somebody who, in one sentence, is brought to tears, remembering what it was like, what the grossest possible crimes committed against human beings, and seeing the disease and starvation and dead bodies. And, he's telling you in one sentence about, being in the camps. And then in the next, there's just a sense of humor that it could be, brought out to life. And it seems that there's an emotional strength, that really just comes out when he's speaking with you, and kind of the way in which the two of you are kind of going between these very dark moments, but also he sees the light, and he's joking, and he's talking about, his wonderful family. And it's just really remarkable how somebody can have that sense of self and that strength.
I asked him about it explicitly, because it's impossible to miss. He talks about something horrific, and then there's a joke, and not about, he's not, it's not, what's the word? Gallows humor, right? He's not joking about the thing that he saw. He's pivoting away from it and finding something else. And he said, if I didn't laugh, I would spend my whole life crying. But I think it's probably more than that. I think he early on figured out how he thought that he could make his life's work, the inversion of this horrific, horrible Holocaust, into the foundation of a system of justice that he truly believed would work. That he truly believes has the capacity to make war obsolete. And so you run the risk when you listen to him talk about the International Criminal Court of thinking that he's talking about the atrocities that people commit when they're fighting a war. And he's not. He's talking about war. Right? He says, and he talks about it too. He's very, very reflective about the people who he prosecuted, and some of whom he sent to their death, where he's not apologizing for them. He's clear in their guilt. He understands that, but he also understands that had there not been a war, they probably would have lived very mundane lives. Many of them may not have committed a crime against anybody. And so he's able to put those two things together in a way that allows him to get to what he thinks is the root of this, which is not war crimes, it's war itself.
Yeah. He has some pretty powerful statements that he makes about the way in which war perverts human beings, and leads them to do things that otherwise, they would not have done.
Well, I mean, think about his. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it was when he steps forward and says, "We can't go home. We have this whole other thing that we have to look at." He's identified 1 million people who have been killed by a bureaucratic machinery. Right. And so he absolutely clearly sees the operation of a society that under peacetime conditions could have been benign, just grinding human life into dust. And it, they didn't kill 1 million people. He stopped gathering, his ledger of who was killed when he reached 1 million people. So, it's I think he thinks every day of what happens to people who, I wouldn't say good people who could have been good, because he doesn't want to say that when you're perverted, like you're still good, but for your circumstance. I mean, he recognizes evil, and he believes in holding people accounts for the evil they've committed. But he also thinks that there would be less of it without war.
Well, thank you, President Boudreau. I'd like to encourage everybody to visit TAFNI.com to see further films that we have available. And I wish everybody a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for this. It was really a pleasure talking to you about this. And congratulations to everybody involved in TAFNI. This is really one of the great artistic moments of the year, certainly for us as a college, but I think for the city as well. So take advantage of it.
Wonderful.
Thanks.